Hi guys, and welcome to part 2. Unfortunately, Donovan's not going to be able to help me much today. He's doing a big brother duty and taking care of little Johnny. So we're going to start talking about being able to make the steering fit underneath the power wheel idea. We've got a couple of problems we're going to have to overcome. The first of which is that we need to get this front axle centered into where the front axle on the power wheel would be. And that doesn't seem like it would be too big of an issue, but what we're going to run into is that from the center of this steering wheel, and we come back to the center of this front axle, in order to space it where it is on the power wheel, this is around 24 to 26 inches, whereas the power wheel is only about 15 inches. So we're going to have to take and cut this off, pull the whole assembly back in order to eliminate 9 to 10 inches worth. The problem with that is we've got the steering rod that's here. And we need to maintain the steering rod because we need to come out and around the engine that's going to be up in this area. So we're going to have to take and cut this off. We're going to have to weld this tie rod end back on. And hopefully by the time we're done, we'll be able to fit it with this coming out in the center of the dash right where we want it. Let's see. Let's try a tie rod breaker. What the hell? Yes, no? No. No? Okay, wait.
Well, you successfully melted the dashboard.
Come on! Okay, well the dashboard's officially melted.
Yep. And that's so much for the all-stock MTD dash.
Well, I didn't need to save the dash.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Alright, we've decided we're just going to go and take the cotter pin off the bottom of the gear and pull the whole thing up through. Alright, so it looks like it's actually not a cotter pin. It looks like it's an actual just giant Phillips. So we're going to get an impact and see if that'll come out of there. Hopefully it will. For those who don't know, I'm not a fan of MTDs, and this is why. There's no reason this couldn't have been just a real honest-to-God bolt. So the problem we have now is that I'm turning the stupid steering wheel. I'm going to loop my foot into it and see if we can get it to stay. Try this again. You can do it using vice grips. And you have to have something wedged through the steering wheel so it refuses to turn. Alright, so basically what I have decided I'm going to do is I need basically from here forward, and then I need to chop 10 inches out of it, square it together, and then tie the tie rod together. Now, what I've decided is if I try and weld this section of frame onto the other half of the frame and butt it up and everything else, it's just going to end up as a big mess. So what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to take and cut this off and take all of this extra junk out, and then I'm going to take the front piece and cut it off, and I'm going to weld a square piece of tubing down the rail right on this straight edge here, so I've got a point to work from, because that straight edge is going to line up with this straight edge underneath this section I need for the steering column, and then from there we can go straight back and piece in the part that's going to be the rear, and then from there we'll be able to set up the drive shaft. So cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, square tube, straight edge, that's where we're going to go with it. So all of this junk and everything that's in this area, all the clutch, everything needs to come out. Just figured I'd add this into this video these Phillips always end up rusted in place. And basically they sell these impact drivers. If you go into an automotive store, they're usually with the brake supplies because they're usually used for breaking rotors free on older vehicles. You just simply set it in, get a really big hammer, in my case a 7.5 pound lead one I made myself, and just drive it down on it. Alright, so in the interest of honesty, I did make a mistake earlier in this video that I'm going to have to figure out how to get around. And what that mistake is originally in the video I said I was going to run a piece of 1x1 down the outside of this. But eventually these 13-inch tires will become 16-inch tires. And if they were to be 16s, then this would happen. As you can see, I can just barely fit my finger in there. Now if they were 16-inch tires, they would be rubbing on this piece of frame rail regardless of a piece of 1-inch there. But even with the 13s, if I put a piece of 1-inch down the side of this, these tires would end up rubbing. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to get everything cut off, and then we're going to put a piece of plate on the inside and weld the frame together. There's no reason I should really have to interact very much with this area of the chassis once it's built, but I still want to keep it as open as possible. So we'll weld a piece of panel in here, and then that way we've got as much room for pivoting as possible, because we're already losing 10 inches off of the length of this chassis as far as wheel-to-wheel center is concerned, which means its turn radius is already going to be questionable. That, and if we locker the rear end, it's going to make it even worse. Okay, so we're going to get started of cutting this up, and then we're going to cut this section out at about 10 inches, well 9.5, 10 inches back, butt the whole thing together, weld it up, and then cut off so that we have the steering wheel stanchion also. Here we go. Alright, well what you guys can't see on this is that this MTD has a bolt over mount that comes over the top. One bolt is here, and it's at about 2 3/4 inches in, and then the other one over here is actually only at 2 inches in. So what I've decided we're going to do is we're going to go to the outside of this one and leave enough space to be able to bolt through, which would put us at with a 1/2 inch of grace, would put us at about 3 1/4 inches.
And that leaves us about 9.5 inches for us to cut off right here.
Alright, so at this point, if you can see, we've still left a little bit of an area here. That way we can take some of the piece of this panel that we just cut off, and we can cut a couple of chunks out of it, like so, and then be able to put it over the top of this and weld it solid. Alright, so in a second I'm going to grab the camera and I'm going to do a walk around on the mock-up we have right now. But I just want to explain something. First of all, if you look at it, I'm not sure if you can see from the perspective of the camera, but the nose is actually sitting 2 inches lower than the rear center of the tires. And the reason for that is because these are 13s on front and they're 20s on the rear. Eventually I intend to go 16s or maybe 20s all the way around. So I want the nose down slightly so that when I put bigger tires on the front, it lifts it up in order to be level later on when we put more aggressive tires on. So right now, yes, the nose does sit slightly low, but that's because we're going to be putting bigger tires on the front, and that's going to lift it back up to level later. So I'm going to grab the camera, do a quick walk around. So as we can see from the side, you can see where the steering arm is right here. So we should be able to attach through into this area and be able to come up with the steering column. So we're going to have to actually drop it down in order to keep it below the cab of the power wheel. Haven't quite decided on that. I may just plain out level it and then cut into the cab of the power wheel, because I'm going to need a metal area to mount the gas pedal to anyway. As we come up and over, you can actually see that the front mounts for the hood and stuff that were originally for the MTD hood actually stick out into the engine bay area. So we should be able to use those as a solid mounting point for the engine. And a slight pullback so that you can see how it leans a little bit forward. So at this point, what I'm probably going to do is take measurements for the axle height there, the axle height there, set the wheel center at 32, the wheel center at 32, and then weld a bar right in between the two of them, and that'll be my starting point.
Front end is assembled. This needs to be shortened, and once the steering column is done, that needs to be shortened.
So the other part that I want to point out is also that at this point, your rear and your front are assembled. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure from the center of front tire to the center of the rear tire, set them exactly at 32 inches, and then on the inside of this, I'm going to weld that piece of square steel tubing we were talking about. There's no reason I should have to worry about anything underneath this plate because the engine is sitting right here during the final assembly, and the gas tank should sit somewhere on top of this piece. So I'm going to put the steel tube on the inside of this piece here and come back and butt it straight up against this back plate. From there, we should be able to start mounting the body on and be able to start mounting the engine. Along with, once the engine is on, create the drive shaft. So, thanks for sticking around for part 2. Part 3 will be up, which will be frame assembly and figuring out where the drive shaft will be coming soon. Thanks, guys.